Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone, and welcome to my channel. Today, I have a 3.4 liter Toyota timing belt. You might think, didn't you just have a 3.4 liter timing belt video? I did. I had to take it down. YouTube flagged it for monetization, for copyright claim or whatever, because there was some slight music in the background. I've removed that, and check it out. Let me show you how to do this timing belt. It's not too bad, except for a couple bumps in the road that I hit. Let me show you how to tackle it. Got to get the upper radiator hose off. I already took the AC belt off from underneath. The next up is going to be the fan clutch. You're going to have 4 nuts. Sometimes you can get it to break loose, but usually you have to use a screwdriver to hold it. I like to use the Capri Tools extra long double box wrench. This is a 12 point, and I'm using the 12 millimeter. Works great for fan clutches. You want to make sure that before you loosen the belts, that you go ahead and break all the nuts loose. It makes it much easier. Otherwise, it's free spinning. So here I'm just going to go back and forth, side to side, up and down, and get the 4 nuts out. Go ahead and get those out of the way so we can work on getting this fan clutch, the fan shroud, and getting to the belts. So this fan shroud has a nice little access underneath it. That pops off with 2 clips, so you don't have to remove the fan clutch to get the fan shroud out, which makes it nice when you're addressing the belts. So here we are with the fan shroud out, and now on to getting the fan clutch out and getting the belts loosened up. So now I'm going to work on getting the belts off. You're just going to loosen up the bolt on the component and loosen up the locking nut, and then loosen up the bolt that tensions the belt. And you will do the reverse to put the belts back on. So from here, I'm gonna get the fan clutch off. Now I can tell you that these fan clutches can be very, very hard to get off. I have had some that won't budge at all, and you just have to keep working side to side. And in this case, one side starts to budge a little bit, and then when you go to loosen up the other side, it just goes back the other way. You have to go side to side with pry bars. I haven't found a really fast, effective way to get this fan clutch off, aside from just a screwdriver or a pry bar, working side to side and having patience. So when you get this fan clutch off, you have to be really careful because it's really hard to get off, and you're wiggling from side to side. You got a pry bar, and you just got a lot of pressure towards the front. And if you have your radiator still in, you could easily smash it against the radiator and it will break. So just be careful. Or if you took the radiator out, you don't have to worry about it. All right, pulleys are off. All right, got to unclip the cam sensor. Just be careful because the ECM side of the cam sensor is clipped onto the cover, and you don't want to break that clip. So for the fan bearing, you're just going to have a bolt and a mechanism for the left side for the power steering belt, and a bolt and a nut for the right side. Not too bad. So for the upper timing cover, just going to be a bunch of 10 millimeters all around the perimeter. And on the left lower portion, you're going to have a little plastic piece, and that's where your cam sensor clips into. These little clips on top of the cover for your plug wires, they usually break, so just be very careful. So we're just going to turn over the engine until the timing mark lines up for the cam. So normally I don't take the radiator out. So here we are with the Capri Tools Flex Head 1/2" impact and a regular impact socket. We're going to try that. We're going to try a weighted socket. We're going to try my Monster stubby impact. We're going to try my neighbor's Carlisle 1/2" stubby impact. We're going to try the Capri Tools Flex Head with a weighted socket. We tried every combination. Nothing worked. This balancer was on there. You would have thought it was a Honda. So now, multiple guns and combinations later, got my little Grip Deco, these little magnetic bolt trays, okay? going to use that because now I have to take the radiator out. This is obviously not going to come out with a stubby gun. I should have just put a ratchet on it and cranked the engine over and broke it loose that way, but I don't ever do that. So here we are. We're going to pull the radiator out. Should have just pulled it out anyways. Literally, it's 2 transmission cooler lines hooked up. Now here we are with my Snap-on big boy gun. Nothing. Now we have a stubby impact, monster stubby impact with a weighted socket. Still nothing. Now here we are with my big boy Milwaukee with a stubby Capri Tools impact socket. I mean, you can see how much torque that was. You can see the camera moving. Look at that, waving the screen. And that won't work. So here's my neighbor with his 1/2-inch Matco gun. He says he has the strongest 1/2-inch impact in the shop. So let's try this and see what happens. So either this works because it's strong, or we just loosen it up with all the other guns. Ha ha ha. Took it right off. So I'm trying out the headlamp, this Odelphi headlamp. There it is. It's pretty bright. You can see the LED strip right there. So just trying it out, see if I like it. Now we got to get the balancer bolt out of the way to get the balancer off. Now on to the balancer. As tight as that bolt was holding the balancer on, I know for sure that this balancer is not going to come off without a puller. However, I'm going to try. Kind of funny that I tried because there's nothing to really pry on. You have a plastic cover. Can't really pry. Can't really get access to the fan bearing. And I can't recall, I haven't done one of these timing belts in a while, but I don't think these balancers just slide off. Generally, if the front of the balancer has bolts, has threaded holes in it, where you could put a puller on there, most of the time, that means that you need a puller to pull it. So now we got to get the puller adapted to the balancer, and that's going to take a minute. So I'm going to go through all my tricks, putting a pry bar on each side, trying to see if it'll move. I've had some balancers that I could get off without a puller, just by wedging it side to side. I'm going to try to tap on it with a hammer. That's not going to work, unfortunately. Especially after all the time I spent trying to get the balancer bolt off, it would have been nice if that thing just popped off. Back to the pry bar. Be very careful if you do this, because you could break the balancer. Sometimes on the back of the balancer is the crank sensor pickup on different vehicles. You could damage that. You could damage the crank sprocket. You could damage all kinds of things. Break timing covers, break fan bearings. So just be very careful. So now I'm going to be setting up my puller in speed fashion. Definitely didn't go as fast as this in real life. I had to find the bolts and set it all up. And then now you're going to see it zip right off. Toyotas are nice. They have nice size holes on the balancer. Some vehicles, the hole in the balancer is really small. So over the years, I've collected all these different bolts for pulling all different kinds of balancers of all different brands, and some of them are stripped. I actually need to go through here and replace some of the bolts. And here's my Milwaukee, the 3/8. I bought the set, came with the 1/2-inch and the 3/8. One of the batteries was bad out of the box. So here's a loaner battery while I had my brand new battery sent in. I'm going to use my Milwaukee gun, also my little Snap-on gun. There's the fan bearing. Got my little Snap-on gun. Going to zap off this lower timing cover. Just a bunch of 10 millimeters holding it on. All right, now here's a little tip for you. So this lower timing cover comes off. Now there is this little spacer that goes in between the timing cover and the balancer. It is very important that it go inside the cover. So I always recommend putting it inside the cover and laying it down that way, so when you pick it up, you cannot misplace it. On a bigger V8 Toyota engine, it's the crank sensor pickup, and I've forgotten to put that on because I was just in a hurry. No matter how long you've been doing it, you will always make that mistake at some point in time. Now we're going to zap off the thermostat housing, which is just 3 nuts. We're not replacing the hose, so I'm going to leave that attached. It's obviously disconnected from the radiator, so the whole thing's just going to pop off. There's also a wiring harness bracket that goes over it on the top bolt, or the top nut, I should say. So now I got to pop the thermostat out. I'm going to be careful not to break it because I made a mistake when I made my parts list. This thing was in for a power steering noise, and it had a leaking power steering system. So unfortunately, I forgot the thermostat was in the water pump, so I didn't sell it. The vehicle was supposed to go this day, so here we are. We're just going to pop it out. We're going to swap the seal over and just transfer it over. There weren't any cooling system issues except for the radiator cap button was missing. So I don't know. So trying to get the balancer off and hitting the crank so much that the cams, the whole timing belt moved over. So I have to rotate the engine and line the cams back up. So now since the balancer's not there, we have to take up some space. So I just have a big nut. I keep it in my cart. I'm just going to spin that in. And just make sure you center it over the crank so it doesn't damage it. Sometimes there's a keyway sticking out on some engines, so be careful. So we're going to put that there. And I'm just going to use my old extra long mountain wrench to spin the engine over and line it back up so we can get started to take this apart. And we're lined up. So now the engine is back in time. So now that we're getting ready for the timing belt, going to zap the balancer off. Going to save that with that nut for later. And I'm going to get my my Sharpie, my oil-based paint marker out. I need to mark the crank sprocket to the belt. I haven't done that yet. Going to wipe it off though, because if it has grease on there or coolant on there, then it will just come right off. And then you'll be looking at it like, where's my mark? That just recently happened to me. You're supposed to take the AC compressor off and take the bracket out. I didn't want to do that. I was going to try to get the tensioner out. You can't do it. I've never been able to do it, but I tried anyways. So to get this off, you just have 4 bolts that hold the compressor to the bracket and the connector. Since I'm doing the power steering lines in the rack, I went ahead and unbolted the power steering pump with the lines attached, moved it out of the way so I could just put the AC compressor up where the airbox goes. That way it's out of the way and I don't have to deal with it. So now I have a ton of room to deal with this. And now I can zap the tensioner off. You just want to go side to side. So now I'm just going to loosen up the tensioner pulley. It's a big Allen. It's usually pretty tight. This one was not that tight. So now it's time to go ahead and take the belt off. So I'm going to slip it off the tensioner pulley over here on the side. Timing belt's kind of weird, the way they come off. Sometimes they slip off the crank first. Sometimes they slip off a cam pulley first. You slip it off the tensioner there. And then we're going to go ahead and walk it off the crank. And then slip it around the water pump. And then off it goes. And there it is. You can see the marks. I'm going to be laying that down to mark the new belt. The marks only work if the engine is timed before you start. So here we're going to take off the tensioner. Now the tensioner is on a bracket assembly. Now you got to watch out for this because there's a washer on the backside. Hondas, Toyotas, Subarus, anytime you have this style tensioner, there's a washer there. So make sure you don't lose it and that you reuse it. Now we're just going to take out all the 10 millis around the water pump, get the water pump out. Now, on this one, I forgot there were studs for the thermostat that go through the water pump. But usually, what I do is I take all the bolts out, and I just barely loosen up the top one so I can hit it with a hammer and get it to break loose. So that way it doesn't fall, drop on the floor, damage anything. I don't have to worry about anything. And then I just grab the last bolt and usually slips out. This one was sitting on studs for the thermostat, so obviously it didn't go anywhere. And now it's stuck on the oil dipstick tube. So you just got 110 milli holding the dipstick to the bracket. Going to loosen that up. Then we can move that to the side. On this water pump, I believe the California emissions has an oil cooler and the non-California emissions doesn't. One of them has a coolant port that comes directly out the side of the water pump by the thermostat. This one has that. So unfortunately, that water port is hitting the dipstick. Now the federal version, I think it's the federal version, does not have that coolant port. It's always been the big thing when you're ordering your parts on which one you need. Now we're going to get out my fire hose brake clean can and clean this all down. You use brake clean like this when you don't pay for it. Ha ha ha, just kidding. Now I like to use the 90-degree die grinder with a roll-lock disc just to get it off. It takes forever to clean if you don't use it. You just have to be really careful because you can dig into the material and damage something. So there's some people that are totally against it, call them whiz wheels. I've used them for my entire career and I've never had a problem because I'm careful. When you use the die grinder like this, you just have to have a real light hand. A lot of the newer vehicles, you don't need the roll-lock disc as much because a lot of stuff is aluminum. And with aluminum, you can use it, but you just have to be really careful. I still use it on aluminum, but you have to be really, really careful. This one needed it. And I'm going to use the little Scotch-Brite pad to clean up around the thermostat housing where I couldn't get in there with the roll-lock disc. I used to do these timing belts quite often, and in some cases, I would just pull the thermostat bolts out, the bolts right there for the thermostat housing. I would just pull them out and just clean the whole thing with the roll-lock disc just to make it easier. On this one, everything was so tight, I didn't want to have to mess with it. Figure it might open up a can of worms that I did not want to open up. So this is a good timing belt kit. Came with the metal gasket for the water pump. I hate that when you take off a metal gasket and take off an old water pump and you have a paper gasket in your kit. That sucks really bad. That happens on Subarus too. Oh, whoops. I forgot to spray it all off before I put the gasket and the water pump on there. So let's go ahead and give it a spray. And I like to take an air nozzle and blow out all the bolt holes. You don't ever want a bolt hole full of coolant or brake clean or water because your bolt won't be able to go down as far and it'll crack something. It won't tighten as far. You'll have a leak. All that stuff. Spray it off with air. So we're going to go ahead and just put the metal gasket on. Slip the water pump on. And I'm going to go ahead and just tighten everything down. And once it's all done and torqued, I'll put the thermostat housing on. Please don't put silicone on the water pump. I find so many times that I take components off like this and there's silicone. And it just really sucks to clean up. You don't need it. The gasket is what seals it, not silicone. So please don't use it. Now here I got to get that hose and the hose clamp back on that coolant port. And here I'm going to go ahead and just put the bolts in. And for some reason I grabbed the wrong socket. So I'm sitting here trying to put all these bolts in, not understanding why they're not going in. I thought maybe I didn't have them lined up. And then I finally figure out right there that it's the wrong socket. It happens. Now this didn't happen here, but I'm using a gun that's way too powerful for these bolts. I shouldn't have done that because all it takes is for one excessive pull of the trigger and you knock the head off and then you're extracting a bolt and everything else. So now it's time for the torque wrench to torque the water pump. Now I know not everybody torques stuff. Some people just zap them on with guns. I always torque. I don't want to take a chance. There's been so many times that I've thought everything's good, and then I get a torque wrench and I check it and I'm off. But I have this weird little habit of going around and torquing all the bolts and then going back and double torquing just to double check, because sometimes when you torque a bolt on one side and you torque it on the other and then you go around in a circle where you started, it's not the same torque anymore. Kind of like cylinder heads. They do the same thing. Don't forget your bolt for the dipstick. So I'm going to put an O-ring on the thermostat here. I didn't get a new thermostat because, well, I haven't done one of these in a minute, and I forgot the thermostat was in the water pump, and it was too late to tell them I needed a thermostat. There was no cooling system issues as far as I know, even though when I took the radiator cap off, the button was missing. So we're going to go ahead and put that in. But if you ever have one of these, that little toggle, that's an air bleed, and it goes at 12 o'clock. All right, got the thermostat housing all cleaned up with the hose still attached. Going to go ahead and slide that on. Don't forget the bracket that bolts through for the wiring harness on top. Going to get those 3 nuts on, and those torque down the same torque as the water pump. Pretty easy. Zap, zap, zap. Torque, torque, torque. All done. And to the torque wrench for the thermostat housing. I could have just waited until I put the thermostat and the thermostat housing on and did all the torquing. Sometimes I get pulled away, and I didn't want to take a chance on forgetting to torque the water pump, and so I just did it that way. So now I'm in a pickle. My service advisor, Nick, he's a great salesman. However, in this timing kit, he sold the one without the tensioner. So now we wait for the tensioner, but I can go ahead and bolt this other stuff on and get everything bolted up, awaiting the tensioner. And unfortunately, since I don't have the tensioner, I can't put the AC bracket back, I can't put the compressor back or anything like that. But we have other stuff to do. I'm doing a rack and pinion on this one, so we can get on to other things while we wait. Now, when you're putting your idler pulley on for your tensioner, not idler pulley, the tensioner pulley, you want to make sure that that bolt spins freely in the housing. If sometimes maybe you need to clean it up, maybe you could put a little lube on it. I've never had one not spin, but I always check it. Because if that doesn't spin, the tensioner can't pivot, and then you have a problem. For this tensioner pulley, I'm going to use my Carbine Tools Hex. All my Hex, Torx, E-Torx, they're all Carbine tools. This one's a 10 milli. You can get them, check them out on Amazon. They have a store. All right, got the tensioner in. It moves nice and free, ready to go. Now it's time to string the belt. Before you put your belt on, you want to make sure that you're going to spray any brake clean that you're going to spray. And take your air nozzle and just really blow away everything, especially the coolant. You don't want coolant to get on your timing belt because then it can make noise. It can make it pop off. I mean, oil and coolant can make a belt come off. So you just want to make sure you do that all before the belt goes on. A great tool to have is little alligator clips. I have these little small ones, and I also have bigger ones. Use them on different timing belts. They work great. This one doesn't move. However, it just keeps the belt on the pulley. It works great in some instances where the cams want to turn. The cams don't turn on this one. Everything sits where it's supposed to, so it's a pretty easy timing belt. Just going to slip everything on. Make sure everything lines up where it did before. On this one, you're obviously going to start with your left cam there. Well, it's actually the right cam, but it's on my left. You're going to start with that one because it has a lip on it. You're going to go around under the idler, around the left side cam sprocket, or my right. And then you're going to bring them both down around the tensioner and everything. Now, once you get it on, sometimes the belt doesn't want to push on all the way. So I'll take like a little hammer, and I'll give it like a little tippy-tappy all around, all the pulleys, and get everything on, so that way I don't have it hanging off, because you don't want the belt to walk. If it's hanging off and starts to turn, it can walk on you. So now let's take a look at the timing. We've got everything lined up. The cams line up with the back cover. Both of them do. And we'll go down to the crank. We'll look at the crank. The crank lines up with my mark. It's a little hard to see because I smudged it. This one actually has a mark on right there, that little dimple actually has a mark on the belt that lines up with that dimple. And then at 12 o'clock, there's a mark in there that lines up. So once we get this all done, we'll put our tensioner in, and then we can roll the engine over and double check that we're still in time. You can see that's how the tensioner works right there. Just kind of pushes in. All right, there we go. I was trying to find a better angle so I could set up the camera so you could see me pull the pin on the tensioner. But before I do that, let me show you. So you can see right here, I've got my mark lined up right there on the right cam. And you can see this belt says right cam. I've got it on that one, it says left cam. And on the crank, it actually says crank. Right above my mark, there's a dot on the crank. And if you look to the right, you can see an arrow where it says crank. This belt you actually didn't need to mark. This one is actually perfectly marked on the belt. But I have a habit of doing it to make sure it's right. As long as the engine is timed prior to marking your belt. All right, let's get this going and then I'm gonna put it back together. This will be the last video I film at the end of the year. Not sure when it will come out, but this is my last day until New Year's. Let's get it. All right, so I got the tensioner in down here. All right, it's kind of stiff. You're gonna have to work it. One bolt, one bolt, one bolt, one bolt. Just go side, 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 because it's gonna do like this. And you want it to push up smooth. You don't want to tear your threads because you're actually threading into an aluminum housing, which I believe is part of the oil pump. Anyways, it doesn't matter. So once you do that and you make sure all your marks are on, the pin's gonna be hard to pull because it was stiff. Oh no. Okay, that's why it was hard to stiff. The pin was pushed in from the back. So gosh. So I'm pretty sure that the tensioner, the pin was sticking too far through the tensioner and that it was hitting the back, and that's why this thing was a little tight to put in. Usually these things thread right in as long as you have them pushed up. Now I suspect the pin was sticking too far through the tensioner and it bit into the engine. That's why the bolts were so hard to get in and also very difficult to get out, because that pin dug in. It should not go in. It should go in smooth. That's exactly what happened. The pin was sticking out too far out the backside, and so basically as I tightened it down, the end bent, and so now I'm stuck. I think I'm gonna have to cut the end off. So I cut the end off where it was inside the rubber boot, and the tensioner actually slid right into the housing like it's supposed to, and the bolts bolted up no problem. I was able to just zap it up. It should not be hard to put in. If it's hard to put in, your pin is sticking through. So some engines, you can grab the pin and just pull it right out. This one was really tight, obviously, because it bent out the back. So I knew it was going to be tight. Now, Hondas, I have found that the 3.5 Hondas, I have a very difficult time pulling the pin. I don't know if it's just me, but I always take cutters and I grab it and I just work it out and work it out. The same way I take out cotter pins. When I find cotter pins, you just grab it with the cutters and you use it as leverage. Now this pin is going to go in the trash. Normally I save them. Now the next part is very important. You're going to be turning the engine over to make sure it's timed. Once upon a time, I did a Toyota engine and it was so easy to time that you couldn't mess up the marks that I didn't turn the engine over by hand, and when I started it, the belt jumped. The reason you turn it over by hand is for two reasons. One, to make sure it's still timed, and two, to get rid of the tension. You want to turn the cams over 2 times, so the engine 2 full revolutions or 4 times on the crank, and then recheck your timing marks. Now the reason I say that is because your crank turns over 2 full revolutions for 1 revolution of your cam. So your crankshaft turns twice before the engine turns over once. So you either want to turn the crank over 4 times or just watch your cam. I usually just watch the cam, let it turn twice, make sure everything's timed up. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed this video watching me do this 3.4 timing belt on this Toyota. It's not incredibly hard. I'm gonna spin the camera around and show you two things: what it looks like with the AC bracket off, and also this headlamp. This headlamp has an LED strip here, and it has a light over here. I'm gonna show you what that looks like when you're looking from my view. So thanks for watching. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content, which you definitely don't want to miss. Let's check out this light. Okay, so this is with no lights at all whatsoever, except for the ones overhead. Now I'm going to turn the LED strip on full blast, so you can see it's pretty bright. I'm looking all around. And then if you're looking at a specific area, you can, so this has high, low, and then there's the spotlight. And you can use the spotlight, and then the spotlight has a high and a low. So high LED, low LED, high spot, low spot, off. And also, this is what it looks like over here with the AC bracket. You got the power line right there for the starter that goes onto the bracket. You're gonna have one bolt that goes through the front here, right there. And you have like 4 that go through the side, and then the compressor just bolts up with 12 millimeters. And that's it.